Um, Dr. Shani Carter. She's a PhD and professor of business and the director of accreditation, and has been at Wagner College since fall 2015. She received a PhD in industrial and labor relations from Cornell University, which is where she also got her undergrad and graduate degrees. She teaches courses in human resource management, organizational behavior, leadership, and thesis practicum. Dr. Carter has published more than 40 articles, both chapters and book chapters and conference proceedings on human resources and assessment of student learning. She's traveled extensively, and today's topic will be further enriched because of her travels and experiences through cities in Europe, Asia, and Africa. And she enjoys sharing her love of international travel with her students, and that we look forward to it. Welcome, Shani.
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I did travel a little bit this summer. And so I wanted to spend a couple minutes discussing some of my experiences from this summer. Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, let me see if I can do it like this. Okay. So the topic for today is Old Friends Made New. And I got the idea while I was driving after leaving the conference in Miami, and how it felt to actually be at that conference in Miami. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that conference. So the conference is an accreditation conference, and our School of Business is accredited by ACBSP, and the national organization, or the home office, we have chapters of schools accredited around the world, but the home office has a conference every June. And so those of us who are directors of accreditation and also sometimes deans or department chairs, we attend the conference in June every year. And we hold it in different cities. So we've held it in Chicago, Washington, Atlanta, Houston. This year we held it in Miami. But the last time that we had the national conference or the global conference was in 2019. So of course we couldn't have it last year. So it's been a while since we were all together in person. In addition, there's 11 regions around the world, and the regions hold conferences every October. So I'm the co-chair of the Northeast region, and we hold the conference in one of the states in the Northeast region. So we've had it in New York, and also in New Hampshire, and New Jersey, and we also couldn't hold that conference. So it's been about 2 years for some of us that we've been not in the same room together. Some of us, it had been 1.5 years, but it was still quite a long time. And, you know, we had all these Zoom meetings and thinking that we were being so productive and working from home. But what I found at the conference in Miami this year was that it was a fewer people than usual, of course, because not everybody could travel for various reasons. But what I found was that it was much more informal, and that everybody treated everybody else like a long lost friend. It really was so refreshing. And people were just looking for opportunities to collaborate and to sit down and have a coffee with people, and to just share, and to just enjoy and to just revel being together. And so I found that really kind of an interesting phenomenon, that even those of us who were sort of, we just pass by each other and say, hello, how are you? More of an informal, more formal in the past is that we were all very, very informal with each other. And in fact, the first day, the first night or the night before the conference started, some of us were there early, and so we went on a dinner cruise together. And as we walked back from the boat to the hotel, because we were right on the water, there was a torrential rainstorm. And I don't know if you've been in Miami in the summer, but it rains every evening, right? And so we were walking back and we were like, it's not gonna rain, it's not gonna, and then it did. And we all got completely drenched. We had to take our shoes off to walk. It was the only way to walk because it was so wet. But we had a blast walking in the rain. None of us had umbrellas, and we just had so much fun. And it happened a couple of other times too, and we were just like, yeah, well, we got wet again. And so it was really, really kind of interesting. And, you know, the men, they all had on their business suits and they got wet and they were like, oh, well. So I wanted to discuss this this phenomenon of what happened. It just made me really curious thinking about that. So, but before I get into the material, I want to ask two questions. And we're not going to do these as the polls where you click, but just maybe we could discuss it. So pre-pandemic, how many days per week did you leave your house to see other people for work? Not for social, but for work. Now, for me, as a professor, our college requires us to be on campus 4 days per week. The full-time professors have to be there 4 days per week. So we all go in 4 days per week. Very rarely will we go 5 days. So my answer would be 4 days a week. So if you're a consultant or if you work in an office, how many days did you usually go in?
It varied, probably 3 to 5 days a week.
Okay, so I have here all 5, Alyssa, all 5 days, Juliet 3 to 5, Oliver 3 to 4, I'm gonna say it wrong again.
Kalpana. Oh, that's okay.
Kalpana.
Sorry.
Kalpana. Okay, 3 to 4. So a lot of days. So most days, at least half of the days per week, we were all out of the house working with people. And sometimes you think of job, you know, a job as a burden. Oh, I have to go to work. I have to go there, as opposed to I get to go there. And so that was our lives pre-pandemic, is that we were always out of the house, you know, regularly out of the house, being around other people for work. Now, the next question is, when was the last time you did that? When was the last time that you attended a conference or a work-related meeting in person, that you went to work or you went to a conference? Was it pre-pandemic, a year and a half? Was it a year ago, 6 months ago, or less than 6 months? Now, for me, it was a month ago.
It was to be specific, February 28, 2020.
Wow, so 18 months, 18 months. Oh, okay, let's see what we have here. Who else put in the chat? So Julia said July 27th. So this year, less than a month. Good for you, good for you. So less than 6 months, Alyssa, less than 6 months. So some of us recently and some of us quite some time ago, that we haven't been with other people for work. And so what I want to talk a little bit about is this idea of being in person or remote with other people for work first, and then I'll start to get into some of the background material that kind of explains what happened with us in Miami. Okay, so the first thing I want to mention or discuss a little bit was this idea of productivity. So we keep hearing about productivity because the United States is a capitalist economy and we focus on work, and that's what we do, and that's what we train kids to do from nursery school to kindergarten all the way through school, is productivity and being productive. And even teaching HR, we're always focusing on productivity. So the pandemic discussions have been about how much work people are getting done and about those work-related issues. So one of the things is that we know that about half of the people today are a little bit hesitant to return to in-person contact and hesitant to go back to the office. And they think, well, I can be productive at home. About half of the people say that they prefer the hybrid model, so they can work partly at home and partly in the office, that it's not necessary to do 40 or 50 hours in the office, and it's really focusing on that productivity. But another issue is that a pretty large percentage of people are thinking about job hopping and being a member of Gen X. So my generation, the Generation X generation born between 1965 and 1980, we're the job hopping generation. So we always would job hop and think nothing of it, just because that's what we just never really trusted companies. But right now, about 25% of people are thinking about changing jobs. People are starting to rethink what's important to them, think about the jobs they're doing, the tasks, the industry, their salary, whether they're focused on experiences versus material possessions. Like maybe people used to be really focused on material possessions and getting money and productivity for material possessions. But now people are thinking about experiences. And in my own field, I know 3 people just in the last month who have changed jobs, and it suddenly. And that's not something professors do, because we usually need a year ahead. And to hear people say, no, I'm leaving, it's kind of like, what? And so it's really a surprise. But that's one of the things that people are saying, is that a lot of people are going to start job hopping. Another issue is that with the productivity issue, the virtual workers, people who worked at home, actually worked a lot more hours per day than they did pre-pandemic, because you're home, your laptop is there, it's turned on, so may as well get another hour in of work. And if people are not spending time commuting, then rather than use that commuting time for their personal lives, now they're using that commuting time to do more work, or at least to work more hours. They're actually not doing more work because people are not increasing the amount of output. It's the same amount of output, which means that hourly productivity has decreased. And there's a long body of literature. That's a surprise, right? You think, oh, more hours, I've got more done. Nope, you didn't. And there's a long body of literature that shows that when work hours increase, people actually work slower. So they get the same amount of work done in 12 hours that they would have done in 8. The idea that people are more productive at home because they're putting in more hours, not necessarily true for everybody. And that means that people are more burned out because you're spending more time sitting in front of your laptop, doing these Zoom meetings and thinking you're working, but you're really spinning your wheels. So people are starting to get burned out. So that's a human issue. If we look at gender issues, this is just something I found. I'm not going to go into this any further in today's discussion, but mothers during the pandemic spent 20 hours per week more than fathers on housework and childcare, Juliet.
That was credit to my husband. He did the hours.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, give him a pat on the back for us.
Definitely.
Good for you.
I was maintaining the business. No one else is going to do that one.
And another thing that we see is that male employees, they just limit their work weeks and their work hours without telling their bosses they are, because they have to handle personal things. Whereas women tend to more say, oh, can I have a couple of hours because I have to handle. So there's some gender differences there, and I'm sure it's going to be really interesting to see what gets published in the next year or two about that. But the whole thing is about productivity, and are people more productive or less productive? Are people working more, people working less? What's their jobs and so forth? The piece that's missing is the interpersonal piece. And so this is when I'm trying to understand something that's going on, the first thing I do is start thinking about, okay, well, what theories are related and what literature could I read? So this is what I landed on. The Hawthorne studies, which I don't know if you all are familiar with them, from the early 1900s, they did some studies. This is when scientific management first started to become widely promulgated. The Hawthorne studies were done at a plant where they were making electrical fuses, and it was a study of lighting and some other issues to try to see how can you set up the physical workplace so that employees can be more productive, and that was the purpose of the study. But during the study, they were watching the employees all the time, and so the employees were doing things that were unexpected based upon the lighting, and then the light bulb went on with the researchers, sorry for the pun, and they realized that it was the social issues at work that were more important than the physical conditions at work for productivity. So the fact that employees were being watched affected their behavior more than anything else affected their behavior. So that's one of the things that's missing from all these discussions about pandemic productivity, is the interpersonal piece, is being with your coworkers, and how does that affect the work that you're doing. And then we can also look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I know we're all familiar with. And the model does have some shortcomings. So not every culture has all of these needs, and not every person has all of the needs in this order. But to still look at the hierarchy of needs, that most people have most of these needs. And if you look right there, smack dab in the middle of the hierarchy is the social needs: love and belonging, friendship, intimacy, family, sense of belonging. And that comes before esteem and before self-actualization. So you have the safety, right? We all have our mask on, we're all vaccinated, but something is missing. And that's the social piece that is missing. And that's the piece that a lot of people are not really talking about. So I wanted to go a little bit deeper into this issue about the social issues and the being in person, and what's so special about being in person. Why can't we all just be on Zoom? So friendship and self-esteem are reciprocal. So when you have close friends and you can be with them and lean on them, and they can lean on you and boost each other up, that increases your self-esteem. And people who have a healthy sense of self-esteem have better friendships, because you have something to bring to the friendship, right? Excuse me. So self-esteem and friendships are reciprocal. The better the self-esteem, the better the friendships, the better the friendships, the better the self-esteem. And that is helped by the in-person interactions. Also, we know that positive social relationships and having social support and acceptance, social acceptance, are key for self-esteem and key for friendship. So we all saw Bridget Jones, right? Everybody saw the first Bridget Jones movie, right? Remember when Colin said to Bridget, and I know that wasn't his name, it's Mark Darcy in the movie, said to Bridget, "I like you just as you are," right? So that's the key for the in-person interactions and the self-esteem. And that just kind of blew her and all of her friends out of the water. It's like, just as I am, really? So that's really, really important for people. It's a necessity for people to be accepted just as they are. If we think about physical health, so friendships and having close personal relationships are very important for your physical health. So we know that stress or isolation, which can cause stress, leads to lots of physical problems. It leads to excessive cortisone and cortisol and adrenaline in your body. And then that affects your heart. It causes heart problems, heart disease, diabetes, lack of sleep, weight gain, all these health-related problems. So if people don't have friendships, and if they can't be around other people and they're isolated, then their physical health starts to deteriorate. And we see this a lot of times with elderly people who become isolated. It's not just that they're not eating enough, it's that they're isolated and they're under stress. And then when you're under stress, one of the first parts of your body that shuts down is your digestive system, because if we're fight or flight, your body says, well, I really don't need to eat right now in order to survive. And so if you're under stress, then you don't eat, and then you have poor nutrition, and then it's a sort of a downward spiral. So in-person interactions are very, very important for friendships, self-esteem, physical health. And I think that was probably part of what led the positive interactions in Miami. And now going a little bit further into organizational behavior theories, what can happen with in-person interactions that might be limited by virtual interactions? So we're here on Zoom, right? And so most of us have our cameras on, but a couple of us don't. And I confess that sometimes when I'm in Zoom meetings, I turn my camera off too, and then I'll go and wash the dishes while I'm listening to whatever it is. So what can happen with in-person interactions that might be limited or difficult with being on Zoom or virtual interactions? One is this thing called intragroup emotional convergence. You know how it is when you hear somebody laugh and then you start to laugh too, and everybody starts to laugh, right? So that's where emotions start to converge with each other. So when you're in person with somebody, you can see their emotions better than you can on Zoom. It's all that little body language. And when people are together in a room collaborating, they're experiencing the same thing simultaneously. Whereas we're all on Zoom and each of us are experiencing different things. So I'm here with you all, but I'm also looking out my back window and I just saw a bird and then I saw a squirrel. So my experiences are a little bit different than everybody else's. But if you're in a room together, then everybody's experiencing the same thing and you're bouncing ideas off of each other. And sometimes that doesn't happen in Zoom. Another concept is called capitalization, which means that you're sharing a positive event with your coworkers, right? So you just had a paper accepted, or you just got a contract as a consultant. Something good just happened to you, and you happen to be sitting next to somebody and say, "Hey, guess just what happened? I just got a new dog," or "I just got a promotion," or "I just," whatever it was. But on Zoom, you might not take the time for that because you're trying to get off the Zoom meeting. And so, no, I'm not going to mention that because I have something else I need to do. So that capitalization tends to happen less. And then you have weaker emotional bonds with your coworkers. The good thing about sharing positive events with people is that other people can be inspired. So they might say, wow, if you were able to do that, then I think I could try it too. But, we do have some people who are competitive, in which case they'll get a little envious, right? So to give you a funny story about the envy, my mother and I have always been super competitive with each other, or I should say she's always been really competitive with me. So when I just went to my doctor, we would go to the same doctor, and I lost 13 pounds during the pandemic, right? And so I've been dieting and trying to be healthy and whatnot. And so once she saw that I was losing weight, then she went on a diet, and now she's being competitive with. So we went to the state fair, and she refused to eat any of the food. No. So she's super competitive. So, but that could be a good thing, right? It could be healthy competition. So it's kind of funny. But that might not happen on Zoom, where you might not share those things. Another thing is emotional acknowledgement increases trust, right? So when people share their emotions with you and then you acknowledge them, then that increases the trust between you. But what's interesting is that sharing negative emotions or acknowledging negative emotions, of course, is more costly because then you have to invest empathy, and it costs you more to acknowledge somebody's negative emotions, but that increases trust even more than acknowledging the positive emotions, because then the person saw that you really invested in them. But again, on Zoom, we might not share some of those negative things, right? You might not say, oh, my dog is sick, or oh, that paper wasn't accepted, because you just want to get off me. So there's less opportunities to increase trust and increase bonding with people in a virtual environment than in an in-person environment. Okay, a little bit more about what we can do in person that might be limited by virtual interactions. And so now I want to talk a little bit about work. So organization knowledge creation is easier in person than in the virtual environment, because again, you're sitting in the same room, you have the interpersonal interactions, you might have a transformational leader, and then you can share your expertise easier in person. Imagine sitting in a room with people for an hour discussing a project, as opposed to being on Zoom for a half an hour or an hour, right? People are not going to do an hour Zoom. They might do an hour Zoom meeting, but they're not going to be, really linked in during the. So that organization knowledge creation and getting the organization to grow and be more creative and expand happens better when people are in person than when people are in a virtual environment. And I think that probably also was one of the things that made us so happy to be together in person, was that we really started thinking about, okay, how can we collaborate? How can we do something together? Let's work together on these different issues. So the collaboration's higher, creativity, higher production, and people are more engaged and more animated in person than they are on Zoom. So people get distracted on Zoom. They're anxious to get off the meetings, a little bit lower morale, maybe a little less collegiality. And I do have to say, I was really disappointed that we were holding this meeting today on Zoom. I was really hoping we could all be together in a nice restaurant and have some hors d'oeuvres and, maybe a glass of wine. And it was like, no, it's going to be on Zoom. And I was like, oh, yeah, really? I was so disappointed. So I don't know, maybe next month or the month after that, we'll actually be able to be in the room together, which would be nice. So now next thing is, I want to talk a little bit about people are going to be going back to work. So at my campus, we're going back, all of the full-time faculty, all the faculty have to go back to campus to teach in person. Whereas we've been home for maybe 18 months. Well, at least I went to campus. A lot of people haven't gone to campus. But even when I went to campus to teach, I only went and I taught my class and then I would leave. So it was kind of being at home, kind of. But if you're going to move people back to in-person work, and Juliet, you saw this with your son, right? So it's going to be a difficult transition because everybody was forced to become somewhat of an introvert and a turtle. So how do you get people out of that? One, of course, is psychological safety, because people are afraid, especially those of us in the Northeast near New York, where we had the first wave of the pandemic, where so many people got sick and so many people died, that you do want to allow people the opportunity to at least express some of those concerns and not say, no, don't talk about it, because you don't want to negate people's feelings, and people are going to bring these feelings to work. So let people talk about it, but not to get addicted to talking about it. Communication has to be really, really high, in-person communication. We've all done the email and the Zoom communication, but the idea of stopping by somebody's office, knocking on the door and saying, hey, how are you? Or good job, and task-related praise too, because if we've all been working at home and doing work at home, then you haven't really been face-to-face with somebody who can say, hey, that was a good thing that you did. And that's actually really important for people to hear, that they've done something that was done well, and to hear that face-to-face. And another thing is, because people have been at home alone for so long, I'm sure they've come up with a lot of really interesting ideas for how to operate their companies differently. So you really have to encourage your employees to share the suggestions and not go and say, well, we're just going to go back to doing things the way we've always done them. If you do that, you're probably going to have really, really high turnover, because people are itching to share suggestions. They've been sitting home and coming up with ideas and making notes and so forth. So that's going to be really important too. Find ways to get people to be in the rooms with each other. So have meetings, have task-related meetings, and also try to have some social meetings. Maybe invite somebody out to lunch, stop by, bring somebody a bag of pretzels and sit there and munch them together, just chewing the fat. And that will go a long way to helping to improve the work environment. However, because people have become introverts, you have to allow them to have a little bit of that introversion and let people have some me time. Please don't bring people back into the office and put them in cubicles and make them have to talk to other people for 40 hours a week. They'll get burned out within 3 days. So let people have some of that me time. The next page is directly from American Psychological Association. So I'm a member of APA. And this is what the CEO suggested. So I thought, well, rather than reword it, why not just take the CEO's words and put them here? And it's pretty much the same things that I was saying earlier: employee involvement, flexibility, thinking about employees' growth and their development, making sure that people have opportunities to grow and to develop and to change what they do in their jobs, change the way that they do things, give people recognition and rewards, and not just money, but also other types of recognition. But don't avoid giving them money. Like, don't just give the kumbaya and then nothing else, because people will see right through that. And of course, the health and safety is really key too. So give people the hand sanitizers, the masks if they want them, have people be vaccinated, and so forth. So that was what I had for the background material. So, and I went through that kind of quickly. So questions, anybody want to go back to any of the slides that I went through, any of the comments before we do discussion? We were going to do